Coach here, and we are talking all the things Maggotkin of Nurgle. Very excited about this. Woke up really early for my voice cracks again, but hopefully we'll be all good because I've got a cracking guest, someone who is disgusting and disease ridden,
Okay.
and been given, like you can just clearly see on the look on his face, he's been gifted by the blessings of Nurgle. I have James West. I've been told one of the
Hello.
nicest men in Warhammer. There you go. Doing an introduction, he's already saying hello. For anyone who doesn't know James, James is from the Grand Alliance Houston, from the Texas Master Series. I hear so many great things about you, and I've had the pleasure of interviewing so many people from Texas. Seems like Warhammer competitive is living in Texas these days. But
Yeah.
you earned your shot here on the channel because you went 4-1 at the LVO in January, and then you backed it up 4-1 at the Lone Star GT. So you've had a pretty impressive run over the last couple of weeks with all things Nurgle. And I remember when I looked at your list, James, and I will get your formal introduction in a second.
Okay.
But I was genuinely surprised that you did really well. Not that I was surprised. So when I say surprised, I was surprised that you were doing it with Black King. Spoiler alert. And the reason I was surprised is because when I did my preview to the Battletome, and I did some, discussions early on, people were whinging. They were complaining.
Yeah.
They were ready to burn their Blight Kings like it was Lord Tremendous back in Warhammer Fantasy days who burnt his Elven army. They were ready to burn the house down because they thought Blight Kings were the worst battle tome scroll in the history of mankind. And here we are. You've done 4-1. So I want to unpack that with you.
Yeah. Well, I thank you for the introduction. Yes, I'm James West, out of Houston here. We have a very large Age of Sigmar following in Houston, especially, and just Texas in general. So we get to cut teeth against people all the time. And I've been having a lot of fun with Nurgle since the book came out. And I, mostly used what I had, and it turns out it just it works really well.
Well, you've done incredibly well at two large tournaments. LVO was like just under 200.
Yeah.
Lone Star was about 100. I think it was slightly over or slightly under.
Yeah,
And by the way, please continue.
No, I said we were about 100. Yeah.
Yeah. And when I say surprise, folks, please don't think that I was underrating Black Kings. I thought you guys were just overreacting. If you were a Nurgle player, when the book dropped and they're like, oh, they're terrible, they're too expensive. Like, guys, remember, they've got a 5-up ward. They can heal. There's a lot of good things. Yes, coherency kind of hurt them a little bit, but I thought the community for Nurgle was kind of overreacting when I saw my Discord and Facebook and Twitter and, everyone was talking demons. But funnily enough, the top placing Nurgle armies at two of those competitions were mortals, which is kind of why I wanted to get you on the channel to talk about how do you look at the mortal side, what was in your lists and how you're using it. And, for anyone who still has that legacy of mortals are bad, demons are good, let's myth bust. Let's go back to the 90s and do a myth busting show and
myth busting show. Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah.
Does that sound good?
Yeah, that sounds great.
Got a lot of hype Nurglings in the chat here, James. But let's kick it off. Let's start at the top of the tree and find out why Nurgle. Why are you a Nurgle player, and what got you started into the garden?
Well, the first Nurgle army I ever had was actually Beasts of Chaos. Back when it was a fun painting project because I'm like, oh, these are fun to paint. Back during the end times of Warhammer Fantasy. And I'm like, oh man, Gores, you can mark them now and they can actually do something. And then they crash the world. I'm like, well, okay. But started playing Age of Sigmar just seeing what it's about. And it's they finally put out the General's Handbook, people were playing games, and the community just started kind of growing from there because we had some really dedicated people here in Houston Kyle Valdez, especially, who really got everything kind of from the ground up. But when the Beast of Chaos book came out, I realized like I had like 100 gores, and gores are bad. And I'm like, I can't do this anymore. So I sold them off and worked on other projects. And I got back into Nurgle at the end of our first Texas Masters season in 2019. I actually got second on there playing Archaon and Friends, which is Archaon 12 Varangard. Yeah, they're fun. And I won a Maggotkin, or not Maggotkin, a Glottkin at that event. And then, I love the Glottkin.
Sorry, I'm booing him because you referred to the end times, and it was the Glottkin who ruined my empire. So just
well, no,
know
I
that
had an Empire army too. I know how it is. Yeah, they just walk up, oh, throw a pot, no, blow up Nolan or whatever. Yeah, okay. But it's such a fun model to paint. And when everything was kind of locked down, I'm like, well, I got time. I'll paint them. I painted them up, and I sat there. I'm like, well, I guess I better make an army out of this. And it was actually more of a Slaves of Darkness army, and I actually used converted Stormcast as my Chaos Warriors, which have taken on new life to be my Blight Kings. So when 3.0 came out, that army became illegal. I just didn't have any Maggotkin models to use as battle line because they were all Chaos Warriors. And so I just sort of left it there in the side for a bit. And then the new book comes out, and I look at it. I'm like, oh, okay, I can play this army again. I just got to put them on 40mm bases, and boom, I've got it. And that's kind of the journey to getting into Nurgle, and at least the current version of Nurgle. And I had wanted to actually here he is. He's Glottkin just.
Aww.
So I keep looking at him. And yeah, I mean that's kind of how I got there. I had started into third edition here with Lumineth because I had built them for the end of second because I decided to make 100 infantry, and that was a mistake. Anyway,
Yeah.
but then 3.0 comes out, and that army's not. I can't use it effectively, so I've been using Nurgle instead, and that fits my playstyle a lot more. So,
well, good question, because I actually do want to ask you about playstyle. And before we get into that, Thorson, this is like a strip club. You need to let us dance first, and then we'll get naked towards the end. We will get into the list. The list will be later in the show, because what's more important to me is not necessarily the list. It's how you got there, to understand the decisions on, do you go demon, or do you go mortal, or do you go a mix? Which of the sub factions, and how do you build towards? And I think for me, that's probably the key to this, because I can take James's list and run it at tournament. But the minute points go up or the meta shifts, you might find that you don't adapt as a Nurgle player. So we'll definitely get into the list. That's the trend of this show, is more to talk about the top of the stuff, the decisions. So you are a smarter Nurgle player. Then we'll talk about why he did what he did. Did he take a Glottkin, and why? Did he not take a Glottkin, or he took a Great Unclean One, or why Rodigus, why not? That's really what this is about. Nurgle at a strip club. Don't call me daddy. So Nurgle and its playstyle, right? Because it's probably a really good segue, because Nurgle's playstyle, and I think this was part of the frustrations when I was talking to Nurgle players between the books, right? Because most of the time when someone gets a new battle tome, the books don't shift too much. Yeah, War Scrolls change, and allegiance abilities change, and artifacts change. But rarely do you see the faction actually completely changing its playstyle. Old Nurgle was very much about using the Feculent Narmor in the middle of the board, slingshot whatever troops are best at the time, and rack up combat, rack up contagion points, and just grind out a victory.
Right.
It was a really fast army at the time, probably one of the fastest armies because of the run and charge stuff within the Feculent. And that all changed. That all changed in this book. So what is the Nurgle playstyle now, and what have you found in that kind of journey of playstyle?
So I think for Nurgle, it's actually a book where there's a couple different play styles really based on how you choose to build it. In the case of the mortals that I'm using, it is an army that doesn't have a lot of movement speed, but it is still very fast. And the way that it does that is centered around the Glottkin. I think armies that, if you want to use a lot of the Puskoil Blight Lords, the ones on the flies, or you want to use the drones, those ones are marginally faster, especially because you have a lot of deep striking options with them too. I think if you use a lot of Beasts of Nurgle, which is popular with Befouling Host, that can be a fast-ish army because they can run and charge, and you can have a lot of board control by just moving them around everywhere. Or if you just want to play, like, probably also Befouling Host, but even Munificent Wanderers, and just have a whole bunch of Plague Bearers, that's probably your slowest of your Nurgle options. Again, when it comes to mortals, I went with what I thought was cool, and that's kind of using my design ethos for most armies, but I tweak it around that and what ended up working there. So with what I'm doing with my army, and I don't know if this is the time to pull up the list or however you want me to do this, but the core of the army is the Glottkin. And the reason he is the core of the army is because, one, he's 20 solid wounds. Two, he has a very good spell that adds +1 wound characteristic to a mortal unit, which in this case is Blight Kings. And then the third and most important thing, the thing that makes him 700 points, is Blightcreeg. Blightcreeg is probably the best rule in that book because it allows you to make a charge in your opponent's movement phase. And in this edition, just Warhammer in general, any rule that lets you charge or move out of phase is worth its weight in gold.
Let's unpack why. Because let's imagine I am someone who's newer to Nurgle, and I see a lot of lists on the internet, and people are talking about the Glottkin. And by the way, I want to talk a bit more about as well after this. Because you're right. With the Glottkin, it does add a whole lot of movement shenanigans to your list. Step back as a faction, and James, you correct me if I'm wrong. Nurgle is a traditionally slow army now.
Yes.
Just on paper, it's a slow army.
Yeah.
It has some summoning. You can put models on the board, but overall, it doesn't really have any run and charge stuff. The Feculent Narmor doesn't sling you forward anymore.
Right.
It's just a slow-moving army.
Yes.
Now, there is some movement shenanigans. You mentioned the Glottkin is one, the Lord of Affliction, Nurglings. There's a whole bunch of things that can come in from reserve. So there is some movement shenanigans, but it's not the fastest army anymore.
Right.
What you're really good at is you're able to be durable. You've got your 5-up ward.
Yes.
You heal either 1 or D3, depending on if there is a bunch of special units that we'll talk about in a minute.
Right.
But overall, you're a very durable force, and you can take a punch.
Yes. And that's where mortals excel over the demons. Because the demons, they have their 5-up ward, which is still fantastic, but they don't have much in the way of armor. And so they are less durable, but they usually have a lot more models and wounds to kind of make up for that.
I was going to say that because that was probably one of the things that when the book first dropped, people seemed to be more focused. I mean, everyone obviously looked at different parts of the book, but the things what people were most excited about was it Fleshy Abundance that turned Plague Bearers from 2 wounds into 3 wounds.
Yes.
And that seemed to be the hotness. They're like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. And then you add Sloppity Bilepiper, who can stop you from piling in if you're, within, I think it's a 10-inch range or something from a demon unit or some bubble.
Yeah, I think it's wholly within 12 of the Bilepiper.
Yeah, but like 3 wound Plague Bearers, you double reinforce it. It's 90 wounds in a unit, right? Pretty crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, 3. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Just making sure my maths at this time in the morning
Yeah,
is
because they're
right.
10 men. Yeah. So they.
Yeah,
Yep.
so if you double reinforce them, it would be
Right.
30 models,
Mm-hmm.
3 wounds apiece with the Fleshy Abundance spell.
Mm-hmm.
That's 90 wounds in 1 unit. So, take that objective off me, lol.
Mm-hmm.
What is it about the mortals that you really like? And then let's go into that countercharge stuff and
Mm-hmm.
why that's important, because
Mm-hmm.
I think it's such a unique rule in the game
Mm-hmm.
that we're all trying to learn how to make the most of it and what it really means in third
Mm-hmm.
edition. Because I think what it did in second, if the same rule applied in second
Mm-hmm.
versus third,
Mm-hmm.
it's fundamentally even more powerful in third.
Mm-hmm. So the mortals they hit a whole lot harder than the demons, and that's one reason I look at the demons, at least personally. And I know people who play demon armies, they do very well. But I look at your plague bearer and I said you have to invest a lot of synergies into that, and they still hit like a wet noodle. The beasts of chaos, they can do pretty well, but the mortals, just a blight king, 5 wounds, 3s, red and 1 damage. After combats, they will stomp on units with less than 3 wounds or less. I mean, 5 blight kings will shred a zombie unit. They'll just do it. They'll just shred through infantry like no one's business, and they'll even take down monsters just because of weight of attacks. It's also a very good way to generate disease points, which is the other kind of new Nurgle mechanic that is just so powerful against these strong units. I mean, you can roll terrible with it, but it's just going to start chipping away at stuff and deal extra mortal wounds. So they're deceptively powerful in that way.
I was just looking at my Maggotkin of Nurgle book because you mentioned plague bearers, blight kings being 5 wounds. Now, obviously, they've got a base save.
5 attacks.
Oh, 5 attacks. Sorry, I was like 5. I'm like, whoa, wait a second.
Yep.
When did that happen?
The unit leader has 5 wounds, which throws a lot of people off because you got your 5 models, but they count for 6 on an objective.
One thing I really like about what you've shared already, and it's probably a philosophy that I've had on this channel, it's not necessarily about the top of the meta. It's not about squeezing the absolute, what is the most optimum builds in your list. It's about finding things that you really like and building around it. And I'm not saying that, you have to be running Blight Kings and the Glottkin to be the most competitive. Certainly it is a great combination, but, I have seen really good, units being running around with the big fatty, the great unclean one.
Yeah.
I have seen a whole bunch of other competitive lists. And I think this reminds me a lot of Cities of Sigmar, where it's going to take time for really good lists to kind of come out. It's not as obvious as other books. Like you look at the Stormcast book and there's clear winners, right? And that's why people know things like Long Strikes, Annihilators, Dragons, Formulators. Like you can name the top 5, but there's a lot of shenanigans. Let's talk Glottkin rule, and then I want to actually bring up the allegiance abilities, and I want to unpack how do you think about Nurgle. So talk to me about this rule on the Glottkin, and why is countercharging or charging in your opponent's charge phase an important rule in third?
So the Blightcreek ability, you use it at the end of your opponent's movement phase. You issue the command from the Glottkin to another friendly Maggotkin of Nurgle unit that is within range. And since he counts as a general, it's wholly within 18. If the Glottkin is within 12 inches of an enemy unit, and the unit you have issued it to is within 12 inches of an enemy unit, the Glottkin and then that other unit may attempt to charge. And so using normal charge rules, if you're engaged, you can't charge, but you can still be a target for it. It adds extra movement to the army, but it also denies your opponent a lot of abilities. It denies their movement to get into another position, to say, you want to get into a place to try and take an objective. Well, no, you can't. There's a Glottkin in front of your face now. Or let's say you are a dragon and you're armed with a lance, or you're a fulminator and you're armed with a lance. You did not charge that turn. And that denies a lot of damage off of a lot of those units.
And there are some units that get bonuses when they charge. They get more damage, more rand, mortal wounds. There's something that might get triggered on the base. I'm playing Suns at the moment. Suns get to do some charging rules. And they get to do mortal wounds on the charge. I'm currently running Kragnos, and Kragnos gets to, when they charge, if I charge a monster, I get to roll 2 dice and multiply them, and that's the damage. So it could be like 36 damage on the charge mortal wounds. You could just throw a Nurgling base at me, deny that charge. Not only can I not do up to 36 mortal wounds against a monster, but if I'm racing up the board, I've buffed up a unit. I'm talking myself as your opponent.
Yeah.
I've buffed up a unit. I'm like, right, I have done broken rank, slay the warlord. I've used a battle tactic where I'm going to kill X, or I'm going to try to score Y objective.
Right.
You could deny me.
Yep.
With a Nurgling base.
Yeah.
With a Beast of Chaos. With something that is just a throwaway unit that you're using for screening, and you've pinned me and denied me doing my battle tactic. And that can be the difference. If you talk to any tournament player, folks, you will see that their goal is to score 5 out of 5 battle tactics. And they are building their lists to score 5 out of 5. And if you deny me one...
I mean, even if you win the game in some of these tightly competitive tournaments, just being down a battle tactic can drop you down 4 or 5 places, Yeah.
So I just wanted to put that context to anyone, because they're looking at that going, well, I can charge you my opponent's face. So what? Well, it means that, you can deny certain things, or if they want to charge into X unit, well, you can put in a different unit in there and protect your models.
Right.
You can stop them getting onto an objective. There's so many things you can do with it. It's a really double down. It's a good rule. It's a very good rule.
It's great. And you also toss an extra disease point on them because they're within 3 inches of you at the end of their movement phase.
Let's talk those rules.
Okay.
Right? So let's talk actually rules. So these are your allegiance abilities. You get a whole bunch of things. You can get coalition units, so you can bring in Slaves to Darkness, Clan Pestilence, Skaven. You can bring in Beasts of Chaos. You get some rules around discussing resilience, disease. You get to heal, or there's some rules around healing, as well as a boost to healing. So I don't necessarily, James, need you to go through and do story time with Coach and read through every single rule. But as a Nurgle player, what do you think about your allegiance abilities? Are there some that are more useful than others? Are there things that you want to build around, things that you might think as a trap? I know one of them is a bloody trap. Like when I looked at this and compared it to Cities of Sigmar, I looked at the Legions of Chaos and I thought, why on earth would I want to bring in an ally like a Legion of Chaos, other than like a cool option? Or maybe there's like a couple of models like Skaven. There's a couple of Skaven models that I would consider, but otherwise...
I mean, that's been kind of what the GW has been shifting towards or away from with the Chaos stuff, because before the most recent books and 3rd edition, a lot of the Chaos armies were Slaves of Darkness with those extra rules on top of it. And now they're kind of peeling that back and saying, you want to play Nurgle? You use Nurgle models. So, I mean, yeah, that's my opinion on Legions of Chaos, too. It is what it is. As far as the Allegiance...
Can I just go back into Legions of Chaos? Is there anything that you would consider bringing in? And look, the folks, the reason why I'm a bit hard on the Legions of Chaos is that they don't gain the Maggotkin of Nurgle rules. So if you bring in a coalition unit of Beasts of Chaos, you bring in some Clan Pestilence, they don't get Nurgle, which means they don't get to heal. And more importantly as well, they don't get to benefit really from the cycle of corruption or also give out disease tokens. So they're one or multiple units that you're bringing in that don't get to benefit. Is there anything that you consider or you would bring in from a Legions of Chaos perspective? I've probably only got one concept. I'll answer. I'll tell you what I was thinking, and that really is bringing in a priest. I think bringing in something from Skaven, bringing yourself in a priest, whether it is a Skaven priest or even something from slaves.
Which prayer would you be looking to cast?
I mean, curse might be an example of something that I might want. I'm just saying, like, I'm not saying it's something that I would, but it's a consideration that I would maybe bring.
I think your stuff in Nurgle is so expensive points wise. You just don't have the points to add in something from another book that you get no synergy out of.
Yeah. When I did the preview video, that was literally my last point was there's some good stuff, but you're going to run out of points because your points went up tremendously. Black Kings are what, 250 now?
250 for 5 models.
Yeah, so you run out of points pretty quickly.
Yeah. I mean, I think they're worth every point, but that's just me.
No, you're right. I think they might be just slightly maybe overcosted, like 230, 240, maybe. But I think they're fairly pointed.
But back to the allegiance abilities. I had always advocated that Disgustingly Resilient needed to be on the mortal models, and it needed to just be an allegiance ability. So they did exactly what I wanted them to do. You don't have to have a hero following them around to give them the feel no pain, and that widens up the board for you because each of your guys are, I mean, they're their own little self-contained thing now. Healing is nice. Just heal the 1 wound, or if you're within 14 instead of wholly within of the at least in my case the Glottkin or a Great Unclean One, getting D3 is a nice touch.
Would you, given that the Locus gives you a D3 instead of the 1, as a Nurgle player, would you consider looking to get Horticulus or Festus into the list to increase the amount of D3 heals in your list? Or do you think like one big fatty, whether it is a Great Unclean One or a Glottkin, is enough?
I think it depends on the kind of army you want to play as well, because if you are with a Great Unclean One, you probably could and probably should have other little support heroes. With the Glottkin, you don't really have the points for that, unless you're taking cheaper infantry like Plague Bearers or something. I don't, which in that case, you don't need the D3. So I think it really depends. I don't think healing should ever be something that you should expect to happen. It's just a nice thing when it does, especially on your infantry.
So what I'm hearing from you is don't build a list that is super synergistic towards healing and getting maximum heal.
Right.
It's a nice ability, but certainly it's not probably it's not what's going to win you games.
Yeah. And there's a 1 in 3 chance you just roll a 1 anyway. So, okay. But then the next thing, of course, is diseased. The disease is fantastic because, I mean, you're going to trigger that up to 10 times a game. And that can be a lot of mortal wounds onto a unit. And it really can change the tide of some things. I've gotten battle tactics where it's like, oh, this combat didn't go as well as I needed to. And then the model died from disease. And it is, again, it's also not something that unless you're playing a very specific, like Munificent Wanderers build, you should tech your army around. There's some cool spells to get disease out, but I think disease is kind of like an icing on top of an already good cake, as opposed to this is the meat of the cake, the bulk of the cake. This is what my army does. My army does these things, and disease is a fun thing GW gave me on top of it. Because I think
Jamie,
out of all the...
I was just going to ask you, was that Texas coming out there? Were you about to make a reference on meat cake?
I
Is
don't
it
think
like
I
a?
was. I think
thought
I
you
was just.
you were gonna combine. You were gonna combine cake and meat, and I'm like, I didn't see this when I went to Texas barbecue.
No, no. The saying is usually the meat of the
It's all
whatever.
good. I'm only teasing, mate. I'm only teasing. But back to your point, because I also agree with you. I remember when people were initially looking into disease and
Mhm.
they were looking to maximize disease and like, right, I'm gonna get Umbral Spell Portal because like when I cast an endless spell with was it with the Rotbringer Sorcerer,
Yeah.
it gains the Maggotkin of Nurgle keyword, which means I can throw it out, and then I've got endless spells that are going to do disease, or I'm going to put out Souls to their shackles and give me options for disease. And a lot of people were focused on maximizing disease early on and maybe making some suboptimal choices in order to do disease. And at the end of it all, right, you generate disease tokens through the movement and through combat phase primarily.
Right.
And you do look on average, you're going to do up to look if you maximize it right, and every unit on the battlefield had 7 disease tokens. Statistically, you're likely to be doing 3 or 4 mortal wounds at the end of the turn. Is that enough to be forcing units like Umbral Spell Portal, a Rotbringer Sorcerer, Shackles, Deep Striking, a lot of Affliction, and some Puskor Blight Lords into a list just to get disease? No.
I think the only list where you would want to try and maximize your disease outside of just getting stuck in with the enemy is if you were doing you had like a Great Unclean one with a Wither Stave. Because then your disease fires off on 3s and on one turn could fire off on 2s. But you have to tech into that, and there's too many armies you could face where that doesn't mean anything. Yeah. Where it isn't enough to be a big thing. You're like, oh, I got all this, and you're playing against like Sons of Behemoth, and they're just okay.
I was literally that's what I'm playing at the moment, and that's literally what I was thinking. I'm like, okay, you do 3 mortal wounds to me.
Yep.
Great. Good for you.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, what you need to do is pull me down.
Right. I mean, it all adds up. It really does, but the range on a lot of those things is like 12 inches, or 21 inches, and it's like you got better spells to cast through a spell portal. I mean, Rancid Visitations exists, so
yeah. And by the way, folks, I'm not saying that Umbral Spell Portal or Shackles is a bad choice. I'm also not saying Rotbringer Sorcerer is a bad choice. What I'm saying is focusing your points value into the concept of maximizing diseases might not get you the return on investment that you are trying to generate. Now, if you build some more things like the Rotbringer Coven, and then you put in the Umbral Spell Portal and you get a couple of cool spells out, different story, because you're doing more than just building around getting maximum disease points. So I just want to clarify for anyone who's thinking, oh my gosh, I'm painting a Rotbringer Sorcerer and I throw it out the window now because it's trash. No, it's more than just trying to build purely on maximum disease. You won't have the damage. You won't have the abilities to make the most of it on the table.
Right. Because you just have to you put so much into it, and you maybe get, I don't know, 3 disease points on unit or something, and then at the end of the turn it goes down to 1, which the 1 stays, and it's really fun to laugh at long strikes as they die to disease, but it's not you're at the end of the day, Nurgle is a combat army, and a lot of it is just getting their big fat bulks into your face. So
how are you doing disease to long strikes? Because
Plague Squall.
In it, cool. Explain a bit more. Just because a lot of people would know that long strikes is hitting at the back of the field, and Nurgle being a short to mid kind of range army, you don't have a lot of, like, if the Plague Claw catapult from Skaven could do disease points, cool, great story. I can fling power from far. So how on earth as a Nurgle player would I reach those long strikes who are sitting in the back of my field, just pew pew?
In this case, at the Lone Star events last weekend, I put Plague Squall on Bloab, because if he's in range of his main spell, I'll be casting that. But Plague Squall, it has no range; it just has line of sight. And you put you roll 7 dice, and for every 6, you put a disease point on a different enemy unit. And the disease, while it can go up to 7 at the end of the Battle Shock phase, goes down to 1. But that 1, if you're rolling 4s, it's just nickel and diamond Stormcast. So
yeah, no, I dig it. And I think, we've got more and more, it's not just long strikes. You've got sentinels, you've got cruel boys with their bolts, the man skewer bolts. You've got daughters bow snakes. You're going to have bloody night haunt soon with crossbows. Like there's going to be more and more shooting. So I think, something to consider. Yeah, the crossbows. Like you've got to start thinking about how can I project power from far. And I think Plague Squall is a good example of how you can do that. So on Bloab, it can be a great option and things like that. But think about how you can project your power because you don't have a lot of range and you don't have the speed and the teleporty shenanigans to actually properly handle some of these things.
Yeah.
Cool. Yep. You done?
I think on the wait, we missed one thing on the allegiance abilities.
All right, I'll bring it back up. Jeez,
and that's it's not on this one. It's the cycle of corruption.
That was literally where I was going. That was literally.
Hey, there we go. All right, there we go. Let's get to it then.
Yep. I don't have the image on my screen, so I do apologize. But so the cycle of corruption changed. It was going to change. I think it's now 3rd edition friendly. First off, thoughts on the cycle of corruption?
I have had games be entirely changed because of the cycle of corruption. I've rolled some times where it hasn't done anything, and then I have other ones where I have by just getting what I've rolled on that table, it's just stopped my opponent's plans in their tracks and allowed me to get significant advantages on them. It is not something that you should rely upon, of course, but if you get something good on it, I mean, you can turn your entire battle round around that. It's amazing.
Here's some solid improvisation. Here's something that I literally just pulled up right now. How good am I? Cool. Yeah. So I've got the cycle of corruption up in front of me for anyone who doesn't know the wheel. First things first, with the cycle, I think one of the most common pieces of feedback that I hear is very luck dependent. If you get early on in the cycle and you can't manipulate it like you used to, that was probably one thing that people will love, the ability to be able to manipulate the wheel far more than you can right now. There are some really good stuff, and really when you start going into 3, 4, and 5, whether it's Plague of Misery, I can't read that in a really, really small text, or Rampant Disease, and there's some really good stuff, like being able to subtract 1 from the charge roll. Units that aren't Nurgle can't pile in, or they've got to kind of move away. You can't do not rally. I couldn't care less about in most cases, but stopping someone from using Inspiring Presence can be really brutal.
Yep. Because you know what salamanders don't have?
What? Please tell me.
They don't have a unit champion.
No, there are some things that there's a few things that don't have a unit champion, but when you roar a unit in combat with a monstrous rampage, it doesn't impact Inspiring Presence because it's only in the combat phase. But being able to stop someone doing some serious damage, then doing some additional chip mortal wounds from disease, this can become really brutal. And look, it maybe not as much because we're not in a horde meta. We're in a very elite meta right now. A lot of points are going into points as a lot of monsters. Talk to me about the early days, like 1, 2, and 3, because I think people have said to me in the past that it obviously the wheel, where you land on the wheel is luck, is real luck. But if you land on 1, 2, or 3, those first couple of turns are not as great, and it's just grinding through.
Yeah. If you roll like 1, I mean, it's going to make it harder for someone to alpha strike you, but you're also hard to alpha strike just in general. Two.
One being that all Maggotkin of
Mm-hmm.
Nurgle heroes have a 4-up ward, so
Right.
that's really nice. But in turn one, if you roll that in turn one, it's pretty useless in most cases.
Fairly useless
in most cases.
Yep. Feckin' Vigor, which is the second one, where they all your units at the start of your hero phase heal D3 model or wounds, not models, heal D3 wounds, and that's like cool. If you roll 2 and you go first, it's literally useless, because nothing's hurt. I think I've had it once where I cycled onto that and I had a unit that was way away from the Glottkin and it helped, but generally speaking, number 2 is not very useful. Number 3 can be in the later games. I actually like to roll number 3 for turn 1 if I can. I mean, it's random, but because
so you got some cooked dice there, mate. You got your
cooked dice, cooked Nurgle, bought straight from GW, but because if you're in the later turns, you can generate a lot more contagion points to summon units, but otherwise not very useful. So the first 3, they later in the game they can be useful if you cycle into it, but early on they're just kind of like, well, nothing's happening this turn sort of thing.
Yeah, it's very much around 4, 5, and 6 that people most like landing on. Although if I landed on number 5 in turn 1, I think I would cry a little bit because number 5 is clearly my favorite. No?
Oh, there. 5. Getting 5 on turn 1 won me a game against Iron Jaws.
Really? Yeah. I mean, yes, in that scenario, because number 5 is like subtract 1 from charge rolls, and non-friendly, non-Nurgle units can't essentially pile in.
Right.
Yes, in an alpha strike, run up the board, Sons with Kragnos or anyone with Kragnos. Obviously that comes into play.
Even against Soulblight Gravelords, Liege of Night, if they're coming from the side, or Castello, that attendance charge is rough.
I'll give that to you. I'll give that to you.
Or it's like, hey, I've barely made that charge. You're like, cool. You attack with 1 model.
Yeah.
And another thing to consider about that one, especially if you roll onto it turn 2, Blightcreek. So your opponent is ready for this charge. They've got their unit. They're buffed up to hell. Those dragons, they move. They're in your face. Cool. Blightcreek. Tag 1 model on the side. You're like, all right, you strike first. You can't pile in. You got 1 model to attack.
Yes. Yeah. And that's actually why, funnily enough, I was playing, and I do want to talk a little bit about this because dragons at the moment are the boogeyman. Fulminators and dragons are the boogeyman. We've forgotten about long strikes. We've forgotten about sentinels. Actually, you don't even care about sentinels. Like chip mortal wounds at you don't care about. And Germ's right, hitting the 4-up ward. If you happen to come up against long strikes, double shooting bow snakes from Daughters of Cain, the 4-up ward is great. So when I said you don't want the 4-up ward, obviously it's situational. But if you're in a melee army and they're not engaging you turn 1, then yes, you've lost your 4-up ward. If you have someone who can project their power early, then you're gonna love it.
Yeah, and that 4-up ward, you either get it turn 1 or you get it turn 3. There's no other way to have it because you have that one that's right after number 6. So,
the corrupted regrowth. So at the start of your hero phase, you receive 1 extra. I wish they didn't use CP in this context. It's like contagion points, command points, and like it created a lot of confusion. People are like, I get a free CP. No, you don't.
Yeah, I don't know. Whatever.
But the wheel is good. Like I guess to bring that point home, wheel is good. There's not a lot of ways you can really manipulate the wheel anymore. Is there? There's like only 1 or 2 ways.
There's one way. It's a command trait, but you have better command traits to take. So
yeah. Yeah, I remember there used to be. Was there a spell? There used to be a spell where you could kind of like.
Yeah, there was a spell where you could set it to whichever one you want. which is mainly getting it prepped for next battle round because almost all of those abilities fired off at the start of the hero phase. So
I'm going to bring up the list. All right. So this is what you all waited for. You've thrown enough dollars on the strip club, and we're ready to kind of take our tops off. Here is the list that was, if for anyone who's just joined recently to the stream, they have no idea what that context was. If you were here from the start, you now know the joke. Here is James's Maggotkin of Nurgle list from the LVO. Now, I know that you went 4-1 with this list. You were the highest playing Nurgle list at the LVO. A couple of weeks later, you backed it up with a 4-1 with a minor change at the Lone Star GT. And I guess I mentioned right at the top of the show that I don't care specifically about the list. What I care about is how you got there. Why is it of the Magath Lords you chose Blowab over the 3? You know, what is it within the Glottkin that really makes it worth 1/3 of your points investment? And, you know, why Black Kings, and why would you reinforce one unit of Black Kings and not take a block of Plague Bearers? And you know what I mean? So this is not the only list you can run, folks. Run your Nurgle list until your heart's content. But this is the one that's worked for James. So James, take me through. You've got your Blessed Sons, Hold the Line, Inspired, Blowab Rotspume, which is the general with Magnificent Bubos, and the Glottkin with Rancid Visitations. Yes, Twisted Tree, absolutely. It is all of the Black Kings. You've got 10 Black Kings, 5 Black Kings, 5 Black Kings, Hunters of the Heartland, so you can not be worried about people roaring at you. You've decided to take the extra artifact with your... ignore that. That's me. No, that's me. That's it. That's an error from me. Ignore that, folks. That was me copying and pasting from... That's my bad. My bad. Don't be commenting it's illegal. Cool. Talk to me about the list.
So the subfaction for Blessed Sons, it's really the only one I can get anything out of. It's basically a Stormcast explosion when my guys die, but they deal disease points instead. So it's like, yeah, okay, it's a nice extra little thing. I expect nothing from it. Hold the Line. I have, you know, a lot of wounds in Blight Kings, so it's a lot to chew through. And then the Triumph I don't use; I just put something on there, so because I'm at 2,000 points.
So your Blessed Sons gives you the extra disease point. So is it if a friendly Blessed Sons model is slain within 1 inch of an enemy before removing it, pick one enemy unit within 1 and roll a dice equal to the wounds. Each 6 is 1 disease point.
Yep.
It's okay. I mean, you're obviously doing it on Blight Kings, which has 4 wounds apiece. So you're getting 4 dice each time they die. So it might be an extra 1 or 2 mortal wounds here and there. You're not dying in droves. It's not like you're a zombie and you're using a dustbin to take your models off the table.
Right.
Is there any other sub-factions that this would possibly work in?
No. I get nothing out of Befouling Host. I mean, an extra tree, but you have to have a Demon General. So can't use that. Droning Guard, I have no flies. Drowned Men, I have no mortal flies. I don't
Filth
have
Bringers
any...
don't... The Rot Bringers or Coven doesn't...
Rot Coven, and then I have no Plague Bearers for Munificent Wanderers. So it's the only one I can do anything with, and it's designed to be the Blight King one anyway. So
yeah, I am a little bit sad that was probably one thing I noticed with the sub-factions is how specific the sub-factions were. Like it really did fit. And that's probably one of my frustrations, even when I was like a Daughters of Cain player, is that it kind of forces you down one route. You know, if I want to do Befouling Host, or Blessed Sons isn't really what I want to build around.
Right.
Well, you know, it's really one or nothing.
And I mean, it can't all be Stormcast, where you can have a bunch of variety within your sub factions, just to get those cool little rules that affect everything. But there's a nice simplicity to having at least how a lot of these used to work, where it's like Staliarch Lords, you take horses, you take this one because you like horses. Or I have Daughters of Cain, and I took Calebron because that was the one where I could have more snakes in my temple nest. back before snakes were good. But I think a lot of the changes now, it does kind of pigeonhole in a different sort of way, in a kind of
Yeah.
less thematic way. So
I think with the sub factions though, when I look at them, they're not game changing regardless. Like there's a couple of nice little boosts, and some will benefit more than others. But ultimately, if you took Blessed Sons like you are, and you're not really trying to build and maximize around your troops dying and giving out disease, it's not like you lose a lot. I think a lot of the cool things are inherent within the list. George, actually, I'll pull up a question from George, who's in the chat. Good question. We probably didn't quite touch on this one. And by the way, shout out to Sick Arthur in the chat as well, who's a jerkwad, who I played his Maggotkin of Nurgle. And he's pinned by dragons in constantly with Nurglings and Beasts of Chaos, or Beasts of Nurgle. Like he's just retreating and charging and pinning me down with Sloppity. And my poor old dragons, my humble Stormdrake Guard couldn't get into combat. They were pinned. I couldn't do anything. And poor old Cronda sat there and cried.
Oh,
so
poor dragons.
So Sikarth, you're a jerk. No, it was a really good game. But back to George's question around summoning, because probably one thing we didn't talk about is the summoning mechanics. Now, some things did change a little bit if you were from the old Nurgle book to the new Nurgle book. It was more about the flexibility in some of the models. So you can still summon. The way you summon hasn't really changed. There's some minor tweaks, but you can still bring in like a Great Unclean One. You can bring yourself some Plague Drones, some Plague Bearers. You can bring yourself a Poxbringer or a new tree. What do you summon?
So this build doesn't build up summoning points very quickly. It really depends on the battle plan, because if it's one where the territories are right next to each other, like it's half the board is your territory, half the board is your opponent's territory, I can get into the opponent's territory very easily and start getting those extra 3 points a turn. But if it's one where it's just 11 inches up, I'm actually out of my territory half the time, and I don't get summoning points very quickly at all. So I don't plan around summoning, but when I can summon something, it's nice. So it all depends on the situation and what I have on hand. If it's like, okay, I need a unit just to sit in the corner and block a charge lane or something, I don't know. If I got 7 points, I'll summon a Sloppy Bile Piper. If I have a or I like the Beast of Nurgle, because it's just a 60 millimeter base that's just in the way. And maybe I'll throw it and charge it at something.
I was going to say the Beast of Nurgle and the Nurgling Swarm would have been two things that I would think about in your list to be able to use the Glottkin countercharge.
A lot of times, I mean, I guess I'll get to kind of how I utilize the list with that. But there are times where I have actually had the Glottkin elsewhere, and he has had a Beast of Nurgle that he will slingshot basically off of using Blight Creek there, because you just need a unit within 12, and it's like, I don't care if this unit gets in combat, but I care if the Glottkin gets in combat.
And obviously if you're trying to counter somebody and you just tie them up, Nurglings and a Beast of Nurgle are great. If you want to buff up, or you want to use your Blight Kings and get in and wreck face, then obviously you slingshot your Blight Kings. But I'm hearing that you don't summon very often. It's not a big part of your strategy. Let's go into the list, because Twisted Trees asked a really good question that I want to bring up. But before we get into his question, I do want to get into the list because I think it might tie in kind of nicely. So you've got yourself Bloab Rot Spume. And Sloppity. Sloppity would be a okay hero, but because there's no demons, you don't really get to maximize Sloppity in this. You'd be getting yourself a minor hero.
Yeah, he's cheap. He's cheap, and I can put him on top of a gravesite or something,
Okay, so let's talk about, you've talked a lot about the Glottkin, and it's 20 wounds, 5-up save, cast a D3 heal. It's massive, right? You get yourself a great command ability. What else does the Glottkin bring to the table?
He is a 2-cast caster. It's a 2-cast, 2 unbinds. Has a decent shooting attack. Ren 2 can deal up to 7 damage, and it can also deal disease points because you have 7 attacks with it. He does have some pretty solid melee attacks now with 3 damage attacks. And he has a special monstrous action that can be used even against other monsters that on a 2-up, it's basically a stomp that's on a 2-up, deals a number of mortal wounds that degrades. And at the top bracket, it's 5 mortal wounds. So you can just body check someone for 5 mortal wounds. It's really, really fun to do that.
Yeah, and I really enjoy that. So as a Suns player, for example, I love that to start reducing screens, because if I can charge into a screen, reduce some of those models, I can potentially manipulate my base in such a way that I can then use any range 2 or range 3 attacks to get into things that I need to get into. So yeah, 5 mortal wounds might go, okay, it sounds nice, but think about how you can use it, not just to do damage, but also better position yourself, because you don't fly. So, you can get choked up pretty easily on the board.
Yep. He does have another rule that doesn't usually come into play very often, but can be very effective with his Blightcreek ability as well. Where at the start of your opponent's movement phase, you roll 2 dice for every enemy unit within 3 inches. And if you roll equal to or over their bravery, they either have to retreat during that movement phase, or they take D6 mortals. So that puts your opponent in a very unenviable position sometimes, where they're like, can I soak these wounds? Do I have to move out of the way? And then your opponent moves, and you're like, okay, I'm gonna charge over here now, sort of thing. Or I will follow you type of situation. Generally speaking, he just is really big, provides a lot of just bubble of buffs, and is a really good thing to build the army around. So it also is a very nice centerpiece model. So I really enjoy the Glottkin for a lot of reasons.
How do you make the most of the Glottkin in this list? Is it upfront and trying to do damage as like a vampire lord on zombie dragon, goes up and tries to wreck face as soon as possible? Is it in the backfield as a support behind the scenes? Like, how do you use the Glottkin in an average game?
It depends on the game and depends on the situation, of course. Despite having 20 wounds, a 4-up save, even with a 5-up ward, it only goes so far. He will probably get mulched by certain things. So a lot of times I will run him side by side with the 10-man Blight King unit, and the goal is not to get the Glottkin in combat. The goal is to get those Blight Kings into combat, because they're actually the solid core of that army. And the Blight King's job is to support that unit. And then if he is able to get onto the side of something, or he's able to, he delivers them, and then he goes off and does something else, is often what happens.
Okay, so you're using him to replace the tree, essentially, where you're using it as a delivery mechanism to get those Blight Kings up into the face, and then you might go and charge something else. And I imagine you just keep kind of doing those types of things with your Blight Kings. And obviously, like, this situation changes, but just again, like, some people might get concerned about using a 700-point model, because it has some good shooting, it has some good combat, it does mortals.
A lot of package, but yes, it is a third of your army in one concentrated spot. So I understand that.
Yeah, cool. Look, it's a great. Yeah, like, just don't be smart with it, I think, is the key. But the thing that people kind of have started unlocking is it is the time of the Maggoth Lord. It seems like it has been a long time coming, and I've been playing Age of Sigmar since day one, and I reckon I might have played one Maggoth Lord in my entire 6 to 7 years of Age of Sigmar. There's just something that never really has hit the table. So much so that, like, a year ago, I sold 3 of them new in box from the End Times. Just sold them like that. And
they weren't doing anything.
No,
They hit like wet noodles. They didn't have a whole lot of survivability because they didn't have the built-in 5-up feel no pain, and it wasn't. Yeah, no, I get it. And then this book comes around, and especially in the monster, I don't know, monster meta, but I mean with this battle pack, I mean monsters are so effective that you have this. I mean, 300 is not exactly cheap, but you get a lot out of those models.
I think 300 is cheap. It is a very good valued investment of 300. It takes a lot of the points that like the Great Unclean one used to around the 300 point mark, and indeed they are now impossible to find. The irony twisted tree. If I would have held on to those three new in box, I think I sold them for I sold them like less than RRP, right? Hindsight is wonderful, but Magath Lords. Why is it the time of the Magath Lord? Why do you only have one? Of the three, why is it you've chosen Wizard Magath Lord? Because a lot of people really like Orgots, and he's definitely a massive damage dealer.
So in my case, I had one. I cannot fit Morbidex into this list because he's 320. But I just had no interest in him. He does nothing for me. Like Morbidex, you take if you want Nurglings, I guess. Orgot, it was actually a very tough decision between Orgots and Blowout here. Because Orgots, he's throwing out commands left and right for free. You are very command point efficient with him. He has a 3-up save, a 3-up 5-up. He's really hard to take down with his 14 wounds, I think.
Horgot's got 14 and Blowout's got 13.
Yep. He's got good damage with those rod axes of his, and then all the mounts are solid. So that was a very hard choice of, do I want this guy who can be self-sustaining and go around and help the Blight Kings here and just throw them at something to kill things, or do I want Blowout? And I ended up going with Blowout because he's a great support piece. He has the best shooting attack, in my opinion, out of the three, especially with the range of 14. And Ren 2, it's solid. He has an innate +1 to cast, which is really good. And it makes enemy wizards -1 to cast if they're near him, which is cool if they're in range. Just being near him in the shooting and the combat phase can deal mortal wounds and make your opponent -1 to hit, which is huge. And then lastly, his inbuilt spell is so good.
The Miasma of Pestilence.
Yeah.
So is it casting value of 6, range 14, pick an enemy unit within range until the next hero phase, roll a dice. Any wounds or mortal wounds were allocated to this unit. On a 2+, it suffers D3 mortals.
Yeah. And that's crazy in an army that can deal wounds in basically every phase.
Roll a dice at the end of each phase. Okay. So if you're doing... Go on.
Yeah, I mean, you can like an arcane bolt, you can deal wounds in the hero phase. Well, I guess any phase you want, really. Yeah. You have shooting attacks. You can deal, with monstrous rampages. You can deal in the charge phase, combat, of course, and then battle shock. You even deal wounds in the battle shock phase because of your disease points.
Sickarth, I swear this was unintentional. I wasn't teasing you about it being a supersonic fast, not anymore. I was just not trying to pick up my traditional get swifty hat. So I'm not teasing you, Nurgle. You are slow, but let's call it revenge for what you did to me on Tabletop Simulator. But yeah, no, it's a great spell. I think what I just wanted to call out was I see a lot of people leaning towards Horgots, which is a great.
It's fantastic choice. Yeah,
it's a great model. It's got a little bit more wounds, has a better save, it does more damage. So if you're looking for combat, Horgots is the one that you want. If you need utility and wizardry, this is the Blowab's good, and given that a lot of wizards, I wouldn't say a lot, but there is a high amount of wizards who are also those monster heroes that are in the middle of the board. It is certainly easy to be within 14 inches. It's no longer the age where the wizards sat at the back shooting from 30 inches, because a lot of those wizards are now hero monsters. So there's a good chance for you to be within, and it could be the difference between a Mystic Shield. It could be the difference between some of those critical spells within combat. So I like that. Thoughts on Morbidex? Because Morbidex seems to be the poor cousin between the three. It seems like, yeah, Morbidex is good, but is not as good as the other two. And
so
people have talked about taking two of the three. Like they'll happily not take the Glottkin, and they'll run two of them, and it's always Morbidex that misses out.
Well, I think you can run the two of them, yes, you can run two of them, and you have now two power projection areas, because that's what they do. They're leader units, especially Orgots. Very command point efficient. Morbidex, his shooting attack is bad. It's short range. It's an afterthought. He's okay in combat. I think he's actually has the same profile as Orgots.
It's slightly less. Like his scythes 5 attacks, the rod axes is 7. It's comparable, right? You know, they've got 14 wounds, he's got 2 wounds less. Morbidex has got 12 wounds, but
he does still have a 3-up save, and he does he heals half the wounds he's taken at the end of the battle shock phase. So he's hard to kill. But beyond that, the only real other synergy he has with just about anything is Nurglings. And you have to ask yourself, do I want to take a 6 block of Nurglings? And what do I get out of that? You get a unit that's hard to remove, because you can't chip damage out Nurglings, but you're also not going to do any damage except for via disease points. And so you just don't, for 20 extra points, you just don't get the synergy out of it, I guess.
Yeah.
It is my opinion, because I don't know. I don't like how the model looks, so I have no idea, no desire to build it.
I think Morbidex plays well into the demon build with Sloppity, with Nurglings. If you want to do that, but do I want to be bringing back a slain Nurgling within 7? Is that a great benefit? Probably not when you compare it to just paying a little bit extra points for Horgots. I think you get a lot more return.
You pay less points for Orgots.
What?
Morbidex is 320. The other two are 300.
Okay, that's crazy. I think Germs mentioned a good point. You know, Morbidex is a great tank in an army that is already tanking. I will go back to Bjorn, who asked a good question, and I'm always conscious of people who may not know some of the terminology we use. So, projection of power or power projection. So, I don't know if you, as the guest, do you want to answer this question, or would you like me to take it?
I guess power projection means different things to different people. I guess in my case, it's you have a solid block you can build around that you can have over in this corner while the rest of your army is doing something over here. And it doesn't matter that they're on the other side of the board from each other. They're able to do what they're able to do, and your opponent must deal with both of them somehow.
It's at a very high level, it is how do you influence the board, and how much of the board can you influence? You know, can you project your power? Can you do damage? Can you unbind? Can you do movement anywhere across the board? Are you contained in certain little areas? So a perfect example would be like Nighthaunt. A lot of Nighthaunt doesn't have a lot of shooting. They are often in what's called a castle, where their heroes are protected by their bodies. And in a lot of situations, they will move up as a castle. So their power is like circular to where the troops are. But then you have other armies like Soulblight Gravelords, or there's a whole bunch of armies that have abilities to come in from reserve. Or long strikes are really powerful because they can shoot from quite far range. Or sentinels can ignore line of sight.
Right.
So really, power projection comes down to how much can you influence the board with your power, whether it's combat, melee, shooting, magic, whatever it might be. But look, there's a lot of stuff that you can do within this build, and if you need more coming in from reserve, you've got, as Matt's talking about here, alpha striking.
Yep.
You can bring, you can breed the Lord of Affliction in and bring the Puskor Blight Lords on the table. So
and that's definitely a way to do it, and I've had it against me, and it's that command trait is solid.
it's a great ability.
Yeah, also depends what you're throwing it against too. So
cool.
Yeah.
All right, I brought your list back,
okay.
And I fixed it. There's no magic extra artifact, so I do want
okay.
I wanted to quickly fix it up. So you got your Glottkin. Glottkin is great. I think the alternative build here, folks, if you don't want to own a Glottkin or you can't find a Glottkin, ironic because you could put in 2 Maggoth Orgots, and Bloab, and take a very similar spot. So there's pros and cons on either side. You then got your Blight Kings. Talk to me about your Blight Kings. Why wouldn't you just go 4 units of 5? Why have you got a block of 10?
The block of 10 is, I mean, I initially did it just because I had 10-man units, and I wanted to see how it played. It plays really well, because that 10-man unit, you're not going to get all their attacks. That's fine. You're still 5 attacks a model. You get 6 or 7 of them in. Okay, you're still doing a ton of damage. The biggest thing is that is 41 wounds for your opponent to chew through. 51 if you get the Glottkin's base spell off on them. And it is a lot to deal with. They deal a lot of damage, and you especially when you combine it with Blightcreek, you're not giving your opponents the ability to ignore that unit. Because you auto run them, 6 inches, 10 inches up the board. It's your opponent's turn. Okay. Are they going to move towards you? Cool. You have to deal with this unit. I'm not giving you a choice. And that is easier to deal with a 5-man unit, even though it's still very hard to deal with them, than it is this 10-man unit. And I think in the games I've played with this army, I've lost that unit twice, maybe.
Question from the chat. I'm just looking at the War Scroll now to see where the synergies may lie. Someone made an interesting comment around the demons, and maybe you're not the. I don't know how much you play on the demon side, but they mentioned potentially about bringing in Bellacor maybe as a coalition. I'm not sure personally. Like, I'm looking at it and I'm sure there's some legs, but I don't know if I would go down to Bellacor.
I mean, Bellacor can be used in any Chaos army as a nice piece just because of his innate rule. He, I mean, he's a self-contained model, basically. I mean, he doesn't even get all that much for being in his own army. He has a self-contained control. He's a solid combat model. Bellacor's just good.
He wouldn't have a ward though. That's probably what makes me nervous, is that he doesn't. That's what I wanted to look at. I'm looking at the War Scroll for Bellacor. Bellacor doesn't have a native ward,
right?
And he relies on Legion of the First Prince or whatever faction it's in. Correct. So if you took Bellacor, look, obviously Dark Master is great. There's some really good stuff in there. Shadow Form is going to mean that he's unmodifiable armor save, good spells.
Yeah.
But you in the meta right now, which is a lot of mortal wound shooting and a lot of damage out there, 14 wound hero, I would feel nervous without a ward, and I'm giving up something compared to like your 5-up Nurgle. But
I wouldn't consider using him. But he is. I mean, it's Bellacor just has a lot going for him.
Yeah.
And I you can really mess up a lot of armies real bad just by one turn, just being like, no.
Yeah. Yeah, that becomes really powerful. You shut down Techless and Croak, and you can shut down a lot of really critical things. You know,
You
that
can shut down those long strikes for a turn, you know.
Correct, or that more crusher that's coming at your face, or those piggies that are coming up. You know, cool, 3 up. No, you're not coming at me. And you know, they've lost that battle tactic. They have, you know, potentially you're going to get double. You know, you're going to double turn them because they've gone alpha on you. So. No, it's just an interesting comment. Maybe when I speak to the Nurgle player, I'll find a Nurgle player to kind of like a demon side, and I'll get their perspective as well. But I probably agree with you, James. I'm probably not super excited with Bellacor in Nurgle.
Yeah.
You just don't have points. You just have points. The points are just so restrictive.
That's too. You just don't have the points for him. When you have other monsters you could take for less points who get more synergy out of it, such as Wargots.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, but you know, you do you. If you want to run it. Like, tell me how you.
I will never tell somebody not to run something because they think it's just cool. Again, that's how I build armies, for better or worse.
Back to what we were talking about before the Dark Master took us over with a 3 up, divert the conversation. You were talking about the 10 Black Kings, and you were talking a little bit, and this is probably one of the concerns from the folks, was that the coherency rule means that you're not going to get all of the attacks out of the Black Kings because their range isn't big enough and their bases are too large that you can't get them all into combat, or unless, you know, you're really, you know, combat happens to go your way. But now that you've gone 4-1 at 2 tournaments, are you still true to keeping them at 10s? And if you do, why?
Because you're able to put your buffs on one unit. You're able to get the max out of like a Mystic Shield. Although oftentimes they just put it on the Glottkin himself. You get the most out of a Blightcreek out of them. You get the most out of Abundance of Flesh. You get a lot out of that in a solid core there. And yeah, you're not going to get all their attacks, but okay, you basically have a Blade of Bodies there. And what's even more fun about that unit is if you put Abundance of Flesh on that unit, you now have a unit of 5 wound models, which are now 2 bodies on each objective.
So for folks who don't know this, if a model has 5 or more wounds and isn't a monster, it counts as 2 on the objective. So if you've got those 10 Blight Kings on an objective, they're now 20, counting as 20.
So yeah, I mean, you are now taking this objective pretty well, and yeah, I mean, you probably aren't going to get everyone to attack, but I mean, you'll take casualties here and there, and that's fine. And they're there to be an anvil, but they're also a hammer. Like, they do both things very well, and through, I mean, 1-inch gaming and stuff, you can kind of get it where you can get a lot of them in, but at the end of the day, I've had really good success having that unit, because there are times when the opponent takes them 3-4 turns, they whittle it down to 3 models, but they're dead, and I have 3 models left. So
you probably thought about this a lot. The Lord of Plagues, a model that doesn't feature in your list. You know, you've obviously got a lot of points tied up into the Black Kings, and you know, the Lord of Plagues gives you, one of those Black King units to get +1 attacks. It's got another great ability that it can. What was it?
If he attacks, they get to attack.
Yep. Any reason why the Lord of Plagues doesn't feature? I assume it's just because of points, and you've thought that
mostly
the value of. Because the value of what the Lord of Plagues wouldn't be nearly as much as I imagine. If you were going to do that, you're either dropping the dry kick down to 5, or you're replacing Blowab.
Yeah,
I imagine.
And I thought about that initially when I was making the list. It just 300 was so perfect. It's like it had to have been designed this way. But I really thought about, instead of taking him, taking 2 smaller heroes, either like a sorcerer and him, like think that fits in 300. That's like 290 or something.
Let's assume it does.
Yeah. And it was between the Lord of Plagues and a Lord of Blights. I don't think the Lord of Blights does enough. Yeah, he gives one model a shooting attack, which can be good, but not all that useful. He's just got a 3-up save and a bunch of wounds. I think that's an alternative way to run this if, say, you don't want the Glottkin. And if you don't want the Glottkin, you should be looking into your smaller heroes, because then you have smaller bases of power throughout there, because you can have a Lord of Plagues supporting a Blight King unit. You can have a Lord of Blight supporting a Blight King unit. You can instead, with those 700 points, have a Lord of Afflictions and a unit of Pusco Blight Lords that you now have on the other side of the board here.
Well, you can take you can take a Lord of Affliction with one single, and then you've scored one of your battle tactics being, both in enemy territory, right? Like that's straight off. Because and we probably could have this discussion, right? Because the chat is talking about, what about gut rot spume? And
yeah, he's good. Well, I don't know. Gutrot himself I'm ambivalent about, but the ability to put a unit in your opponent's backfield is good. But you also, what's his name? Thomas Guan, I think. He runs he runs Glottkin, but he runs Gutrot, and his 10-man unit of Putrid Blight Kings, he just puts in your opponent's backfield. And he says, okay, they're already there. I don't have to deliver them. They're there. You now have to deal with these 40 wounds in your backfield. And it's solid. It really messes with the opponents. I just didn't want to do that, but I appreciate the flexibility you get from being able to just put that many that much damage and that many wounds in your opponent's backfield or on the side of the board, wherever you need it to be, and keep your opponent guessing. So I think anyone who wants to use Gutrot and they want to use that, he pairs so well with Blight Kings, and very, very solid.
Do you want to, though? Just because I can drive with my feet doesn't make it a good idea. And I guess, like, when I'm thinking about Gutrot Spume and I can bring things onto the side of the board, am I not better to be in the middle of the board trying to take on objectives and trying to control the center? Or because, like, if I need something to come from the side, as you've already said, Lord of Afflictions, Plague Drones, I've got Nurgling bases that can do to teleporting Shenanigans. There's a whole bunch of things I can do that already. So why would I want Gutrot?
So I think that works well in a combined arms army, where you have your core of that army, your anvil is Plague Bearers, because now you have your cheaper infantry, and they and you put them in the center of the board and you support them, and you say, cool, kill this, but deal with that. And I think that's how he plays that list, and he did very well at Lone Star with that.
Yeah, I think that's the key, right? Like, when I look at your list and do I want to bring in Gutrot Spume, I think the answer is no. I think the Glottkin with the Blight Kings are a great delivery mechanism, and
they get there fast enough. So
correct. And I could argue, is Blowout better than Horgots? And there's obviously pros and cons on either side. But ultimately, I think the way you've constructed it is great. But if you're right, to your point, if you want a bit more of a mixed arms force, you don't want to run Glottkin, or you don't want to run nearly as many Blight Kings, yeah, Gutrot brings a great delivery mechanism. If you don't want to bring in the Pusco Blight Lords, you want more Blight Kings. Yeah, I think it's some really interesting builds, and I think the question is, what does that 700 points do with the Glottkin, and what can you do with 700 points? And I already mentioned 2 Maggotkin Lords would be the same price. You mentioned earlier you could drop 3 or 4 different smaller heroes: Festus, Lord of Blight, Gutrot, whatever, Harbinger of Decay,
and have plenty of points for another unit too. Yeah.
Correct. Or you could bring yourself, you could bring yourself in a whole bunch of, maybe some screens, maybe something that would protect if we do get into more of these alpha striking, because Kragnos is becoming more and more popular. I'm seeing more Craggies coming out. So in theory, this is good to get your power up. But if someone is charging you Iron Jaws, Kragnos, who knows who else is coming up to charge you, Suns, all of a sudden it's like, well, maybe I do need that delivery mechanism to get in the backfield. Or if that Iron Jaws player rushes up to you in turn one, well, you're in the backfield either avoiding them because your units are in reserve, or then you're in theirs and you've kind of almost denied them because they've rushed up the board, or they won't rush because they're like, well, what's the point rushing when you'll just jump behind me?
Right.
So lots of ideas. I think that's the cool, and that's probably why when I said at the start of the show, it'll take some time for really good lists to come out in the scene, is because there's a lot of list shenanigans and things you can do, and just the choices aren't as obvious as again Storm.
Because a lot of people think it is, because I do get a lot of people looked at a lot of the things that came out and they're just like, this is also expensive and it doesn't do a whole lot. But I mean, people said that about Varngard, and they did. Your opponent can't score objectives if they're dead.
And as there is a lot of people who are out there shooting and a lot of magic and just ultimate power projection, that is one great way to counter the what's going on in the meta. Well, okay, well, your long strikes want to shoot my thing off the board, but guess what? If it's not on the board, then so what? And if I come in from the side, then I can get into your long strikes pretty easily.
Right.
And Matt, to your Matt's point, I am absolutely shocked when I played Sickarth in who was in the chat earlier. I don't know if Sickarth's still here, but I was really surprised how well Beasts of Nurgle do. I was blown away, and the ability with Sloppity to then retreat. Obviously, they inherently can retreat and charge. So then they just constantly be running around, pinning my, wherever I was trying to win the battle, and then Sloppy's denying me. They're quite durable, especially in that particular build where they can. I was very impressed. I think there's some really good builds, and Sickarth is in the chat. So,
and if you're playing, you're almost certainly playing them in Befouling Host, which is generating summoning points faster than the other lists, so you're replacing your losses fairly easily.
Yeah, there's some really good stuff in there. Any reason why you didn't go with the Puskor Blight Lords, given that you are a mortal build? Is there any reason why you didn't go with a Blight Lord unit?
I don't own any.
If you did, would you?
Probably not. I don't think they're useful on their own. I think they're you're better off spending those points on a more solid unit that can deal more damage, like another unit of Blight Kings. However, you take 2, God forbid 4 of them, and you put that with that Lord of Afflictions, they're going to tie up whatever you have put that against for a while, and denying those command abilities, because if you're taking the Lord of Afflictions, you're probably taking that command trait. Is just so solid.
And I really like the ability with the Drowned Men. So after the deployment, you can make those Drowned Men Lord of Afflictions, and Puskor's move. You can move up to 8.
Fast,
so even if you don't want to take them off on the side of the board, you do get an early 8-inch movement, which can be quite brutal if you build around it.
Right. Or you can move them onto an objective and just be like, here you go.
Yeah, I'm already on the objective now. What are you going to do? Or it makes them hard to go, well, I've got 1, 2, and more, especially if they take the top of the turn. So a lot of cool stuff, man. How do you play with them? I guess they kind of bring this home, and we could talk Nurgle till the cows come home, or till they start like rotting with inside and all the maggoty goodness. I thought I'd try to segue into a Nurgle type example, like that meat cake that we had before.
A meat cake. Now I want to make a lasagna. That's a lasagna is basically a meat cake,
or Chicago deep dish pizza. It's
Yeah,
just like
well, I mean, basically, yeah. Yep.
How
So
do you play with this army,
Mhm.
given that you have so little models?
Mhm.
You have so little flexibility on manipulating because things cost so many points.
Mhm.
How do you play, and how did you go 4-1 in 2 tournaments?
Mhm. So, typically I will put the Glottkin, the 10-man unit, and Blowab together in the center of the board, somewhere near each other. So if I need to get like an early battle tactic for running the 3 of them, easy enough, because I'm not usually going to do anything turn 1 but cast my spells, and my opponent will usually give me the first turn. It's fine. I'll just cast spells and move into their face. And
What would be before we move off that point? What would be your battle tactic in turn 1 if you were given turn 1? What's your battle tactic?
Either Monstrous Takeover or Furious Advance.
Okay.
Yep. I'm going to have the 2 5-man units. They're usually going to be on the side objectives or the side of the board, and they're just going to slowly move on up. If my opponent wants to put a lot of put their whole army against one of the 5-man units, that's fine. That's fine. I don't care if I lose them, because you're gonna have to devote a lot of resources to it. But they'll make their way up. And a lot of people underestimate what it does to kill them.
Literally what Matt said. It takes a
Mhm.
very long time. You're right.
Mhm.
There is little models on the table. You've got 22 models here in your particular list.
Mhm.
But the amount of effort
Yes.
and the durability from the healing, from the ward,
Mhm.
from just all of the things.
Mhm.
I think that's probably where, like, I think I've said to Nurgle players many times, you know, you're going to take a punch and then smile back at your opponent, because they'll throw a lot at you and you will take it very well.
Yep. And then you'll put disease on them, and then they'll take wounds out of that. So typically, yes, I'll usually run the big unit up the board with the Glottkin somewhere around there. Depending on the terrain, I may not have him in a position where he can leverage his abilities as well, because that big unit is big. It's in the way, and the Glottkin is a big base too. And then Blowab, oftentimes, once he's kind of done his initial stuff, I will send him off to the side to support one of the smaller units. Because he moves 8 inches. He moves twice as fast as everything else in the army. So he's actually quite speedy. But sometimes I'll have him behind the big unit to just project that potentially -1 to hit bubble, and dealing mortal wounds in your opponent's shooting phase, in the combat phase. It's chip damage, but it's, hey, whatever. It's a free thing. So very often I'll be forced to go first because I'm 5 drops. That's okay. I really want my Hunters of the Heartland. It's that big. And so I'll run them up the board. Opponent will usually kind of move forward. If they are canny about it, they will understand how Blightcreek works, and they will stay out of 12 inches of the Glottkin, because that's the trigger. Yeah, you can be 12 inches of those Blight Kings, but as long as you stay out of 12 inches of the Glottkin, he will not trigger Blightcreek. Sometimes they have no choice. I'm on that objective, and there's no way to get it without being within 12. And so if I'm in 12, I will Blightcreek usually, and now we're stuck in, and I will survive more than you. Now and then the smaller units will slowly make their way up the boards. The Glottkin will go around where he needs to go. The Blowout will go where he needs to go. So I am actually fairly mobile in that case, because I'm able to get them where they need to be, and just kind of roll through and destroy things as I do. Against armies like I think somebody made a comment earlier about like Feral Foray. What do I do with that?
I was going to loop to that, because there are some scenarios where there are a lot of objectives.
The final mission at Lone Star. Oh gosh, I think his name was Roger Barker. Is on the USA team. He was playing Soulblight Gravelords with Legion of Night, and he's able to just pop up everywhere on the board. And so in that case, I sent the 10-man unit just kind of up the board to deal with the zombies because they will, and they did. But I had to keep the Glottkin back to make sure he couldn't just pop Manfred on there. But what's very nice about that is with that kind of long range of Blightcreek, he pops up, and I can be like, okay, you have brought these Graveguard up, and now I charge them. Or I'm in the position to kind of do what I need to do there. And so I had to keep most of the army back in that case, but eventually I'm able to roll forward. That's a mission where I generated a lot of summoning points. I was able to drop some plague bearers on something and be like, all right, you guys deal your thing. Now the guys are going to move forward. And 5 Blight Kings will mow through infantry, because that's another thing that a lot of people in this edition have infantry units that either through sheer number of wounds or just being like, well, you can't kill 20-30 models in a turn. And Blight Kings are like, oh yeah, and they will, because they have so many attacks. And then at the end of combat, they have another rule, Relentless Attackers, where you pick an enemy within 3 inches and roll a die for every model in the Blight King unit that's within 3 inches of that unit. And every die roll that is over the wounds characteristic of that unit, you deal a mortal wound. So that 10 block can deal 10 extra mortal wounds at the end of combat. Now, this is only for units with 3 or less wounds, but I mean, Stormcast, Blood Knights, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Couple of questions to the teacher.
Yeah.
First off, unit of 10 Blight Kings, you'd get more than 5 in. You'd probably on average about 6 to 7, depending on
about
what you're fighting,
7.
and probably you're probably around 6, maybe 7. Obviously, if there's multiple in combat, you might get more of them. I want to loop back to something you said, and then I want to go back to the chat. So there was another really good question from Andy K that I want to bring up. But you mentioned about hunters being important. We missed that. We didn't talk about it in the list. Why would you go hunters? And the reason I asked this is, if you took the gospel of Twitter, you would see battle regiment is OP. Everyone is focused on battle regiment. The race to the bottom to be 1 drop, so you can control who goes first in the first battle round. But you have decided not to go with warlords to get an extra artifact. You haven't even you've gone with hunters. Why hunters?
Well, with the models in this army, I don't think there's any other battalion I can actually use. I mean, I can use a battle regiment, but I'm still a 2-drop army. But hunters, monstrous actions are just that critical to the game in a lot of ways. When the army focuses, the solid core of that army is the infantry. Being able to use not being roared at is huge. I mean, that solid block of Blight Kings, getting them to a 3-up save, they're so hard to hurt in that case. Or if I need to use an all-out attack, or etc. Or if I just want to avoid getting hit with a D3 mortals out of nowhere. It is just so critical, I found. And with this list, the way it's set up, turn order doesn't matter that much to me. If I go second, all right, I've set myself up maybe for a double turn, which I have sometimes. If I go first, I put my buffs up and I run up the board, and I'm still able to do something in my opponent's turn with Blightcreek. So it doesn't really matter to me who goes first or second. In fact, sometimes when the option is taken out of my hands, I'm like, I don't have to care. You tell me what's going on and I will do it. So I understand the importance of 1-drops in certain contexts, but in this battle pack, and it's going to be very interesting when that all changes in a few months, not denying what monsters do is huge.
Good point, because I was going. There's been a couple of like additional questions I was going to ask.
Mhm.
One, we talked a little earlier about potentially flipping out the blowout rot spume for a lot of afflictions, gut rot, some type of rot bringer leader.
Mhm.
You could easily bring this as a 2-drop list to be the rot bring assist. If I bring the list back up for a second, you could make this a 2-drop list if you dropped blowab, brought in a rotbringer list, and then use the rotbringer assist to reduce the drops. Because you'd be
Yeah, I wouldn't use the Rotbringer assist, and the reason I would rather just use a battle regiment because you can't put the Glottkin in the Rotbringer assist. It's only for the like less than 10 wound models.
yeah, which is why I said
Mhm.
you'd have to drop blowab,
Yeah,
and you would bring in a rotbringer leader,
yeah.
and then this would be 2 drops
It'd
if
be
you
one.
use the
It'd be
rotbringer assist.
yeah. Well, if I did that, it would still be. I would just do battle regiment. It's 1 drop in that case because you can't put the Glottkin in the Rotbringer assist.
Thank you, because I was
Mhm.
explicitly trying to call that out because you got 2 battalions in there. One
Mhm.
is obvious, right? It's the
Yeah.
3 fatties, the great unclean
Mhm.
ones. But being that you're immortal, I wanted to call that from you without
Mhm.
telling you about the Rotbring assist.
Yeah.
And it's an okay battalion.
Mhm.
Um, I'm not sure why I would take it. Obviously, the requirements of not having to take lots of small heroes
Mhm.
is good.
Yeah.
It's certainly a good one. But yeah, I think at the moment Battle Rage would be better if you
Mhm.
wanted, but I think you've given us a good explanation on why you're not worried about drops, which then leads me to the second part is how would this list potentially change in the new General's Handbook if Hunters disappeared? Now, obviously, there could be new battalions, but
I have no idea because monsters aren't going to do the same thing. Is this going to be a book that's focused on infantry? Is this going to be a book that's focused on shooting? Is this going to be a book?
well, political response is like, I don't know. I'll wait. I'll wait.
How I have no idea. Maybe I will want to use smaller heroes in the next one, but right now having that extra monster is just so critical.
Yeah, yeah, I
Mhm.
would agree. And I agree. And the cool thing as well is you're not giving a lot of way of monster points as well,
Mhm.
because obviously when you lose a monster, it gives you away a CP.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, and you got some monsters to score some extra VP as
Mhm.
well. You don't have the 3 to get the additional one from the run, but
Yeah.
Beasts of Nurgle, absolutely. I think they are very good,
Oh yeah. Oh
especially in
yeah.
a more demon side.
Mhm.
Big fan. Don't wish shooting on us. I look, if I was making a bold prediction about the next General's Handbook, I would say maybe it'll be wizardy. That'd be my guess. That'd be my guess. Maybe it'd be more of a
Interesting.
wizardy meta.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's shift it all back to Lumineth again. They need to sell more of them, I guess.
Oh, maybe it's the next phase of
Yeah.
malign sorcery and forbidden power, the
Maybe.
unlocking of stuff in
Mhm.
Gur. Who knows?
Yeah.
But I want to talk meta, and I want to then wrap things up.
Okay.
At the moment, you've obviously gone 4-1 in 2 tournaments,
Mhm.
and am I playing Hallow Hard again? No, I'm playing Suns at the moment,
Mhm.
and I'm building my armies on parade for Stormcast.
Okay.
So
Mhm.
no, but I'm very tempted with Krondus in my Hallow Heart. So yes, back to you.
Yep.
What is the landscape that you've faced right now at 2 major tournaments
Mhm.
in third edition, second half of third edition,
Mhm.
post the winter FAQ? What are the types of armies that you need to give advice to? Like, are we you finding lots of dragons? Are you finding a
Mhm.
lot of shooting? Is it magic? Is it still hero heavy?
Mhm.
And I guess what's the advice to the field that you've faced?
Um, so there's definitely heavy shooting in kind of the stuff I faced. I got lucky and I've dodged suns, um, which I think is actually one of the things that will hurt me real bad because I can DPS down things pretty good. I can't DPS down a giant that well, and their damage output does not decrease depreciably. You either kill a giant or you don't. Um, and that's something I'm worried about. Kragnos is difficult because he'll just run 3. He'll just smash through that 10 block unit, and I can kill him, but it's hit or miss. Depends on how the opponent rolls. Um,
What were your two losses, by the way, George? Good question. Like because it's always like what was the one game you dropped each tournament?
So at LVO, it was against Gavin Gregar, who won the whole thing. I mean, it was Living City with 30 crossbows, 4 fulminators and 4 dragons. I mean, on the Vice, which the Vice plays fairly well with this army, but it's, And then the loss at Lone Star was also on the Vice, but it was against a Stormcast list that had 6 long strikes, 4 fulminators, Bastion, Aventus Firestrike, which turns out Aventus was the important part of that list because Cycle of the Storm kept my disease points from killing anything. Looking back on it, I actually may have won that game, but I forgot to put a Nurgling out, or not Nurgling, a Plague Bearer out, and I miscounted, but I messed up. Who knows? It doesn't really matter.
Does Nurgle have a problem with the Vice, or was it just a bad matchup? Because both of the games you've mentioned that you've lost were the Vice.
I think it was the bad matchup. Against Gavin's list, he dominates mobility because and that's the thing is he gets around Blight Creek because he'll stay out of range, shoot, and then move into range, and that's a shooting phase. I can't do anything about it, and so I will not deny him his fulminator buffs. He's able to pick and choose what he needs to do. The crossbows, plops them out, bam, 60 shots, gets a double turn, bam, that's 60 more shots. And they just took down the Glottkin there. And, it is what it is. You can't hide from it. Not on the Vice anyway. So that's what happened there. Against
the Stormcast.
The Stormcast, it was neck and neck each time. Because I can't get to his backfield. But that's, I was just moving up. He was able with those long strikes to kill Blowab. And then he was able to kill the Glottkin. And he just had enough kind of ablative stuff to put in the way to keep me from ever getting to the long strikes. Because I don't move that fast and he's not coming to me. And I'm like, well, I can either sit here and we don't do anything until turn 4, or I can start moving towards you. And he could have easily translocated those guys where he needs them to be. So I need to come towards him. And that game actually ended up where I had summoned some Plague Bearers in to take the middle objective, and he had enough models with Bastion, Aventus. He was able to retreat him out of combat to get onto the objective there, and he had to kill enough Plague Bearers, and he made a charge with that Fulminator, and that Fulminator did enough damage, and is what it is. So that's kind of where that came down. That was a very close game, like right to the end of turn 5. So that's where it is. Yep.
Two other questions. Does Beast of Chaos scare you at all? I don't know if you've seen the new White Dwarf with like render.
Oh, I've seen them, and part of me is just like, oh, GW, you teases. You're trying to get me back into Beast of Chaos, but no, you need to give me new models first, and then I'll buy them. Do they scare me? No, probably not. We'll see when we come into them, but they're infantry. I'll shred infantry. They're fast. Beasts of Chaos are probably one of the fastest armies out there. But you can only use Inspiring Presence on one unit. So what's it going to be?
They'll just do hordes of. They'll just do lots of dragon ogres and bullgors, and
I think that's a neat concept to play against. And Guide LVO went 4-1 with bullgors. So
yeah, interviewed him literally last week, Matt. So may or may not be getting a card ride to him to the LVO 2023. So partially concerned, partially excited if Matt's listening to this. But and then the last question I really had was who doesn't Nurgle do well against? Like, is there armies that at a tournament you'd prefer not to play, and why?
So and that depends on the Nurgle list you're doing. Because if you have a lot of screens, you have a lot of like plague bearers or something, you don't care that much about suns. Are you going to kill the suns? I don't know, probably not, because you can't do any damage. But in my case, I'm actually afraid of Sons of Behemoth. I'd be afraid of Stonehorns, a lot of them, because they have a lot of high rends. They deal a lot of wounds that I can't do that much about. And it's really a question of, can I roll fives? Living City, I don't like either, as I said, because they have the mobility to get around me and stay out of my my counter assault range, and I don't have the movement to chase them. So they're able to pick the thing. So armies which are able to either get around what I can do, or choose the timing of when they're going to do what they can. Those are the ones I'm more worried about. But a lot of armies, I just don't give them, like, if their big thing is they need to just have a solid, core, and this is what they do with it. I'm like, okay, I'll just come at you. And one of us will survive, and it's probably me.
Yeah, you've got the survivability and the durability. I imagine things that can pin you into your backfield with, and obviously, list dependent, but anything that can keep you from advancing up the board and scoring, will make your life
very
hard.
rough. Like another guy in Texas here, Matt Robish. He did very well at Lone Star. He's using 20 Blood Knights. He's got 2 units of 10. And then the Rousing Commander Vampire Lord with the -1 thing. So he just got the turn priorities and just crammed them into my army. And the terrain favored him too, because it pinned me in. And yeah, I cleared all his stuff, but he had scored too many points for me to make it up.
With your game against Gavin, what was the thing that did you the most damage? Was it the crossbows? Was it the dragons? And that's kind of why I pulled that comment up, because Matt, making a good comment around the Iron Drakes. I think it's less about the mortal wounds. You handle the mortal wounds really well. Dragons do what, D6 or D3 mortal wounds each.
I'm not scared about dragons.
Literally, what I was gonna say is, you're like,
Yeah, and I mean, especially because a lot of them they'll move forward, then they'll move again. I'm like, oh, cool, I'll charge you.
Yes.
And and disease will eat the dragon. So,
but it's the things like the high volume of quality attacks, Iron Drakes, crossbows, 2 examples. Hitting on 3s or hitting on 2s, wounding on 2s.
If you make me do, 30 saves, I'm going to fail a lot of them.
Correct. The weight of dice, buffed up witch elves probably would give you a double knife witch elves right now.
Yeah.
Man, I mean, that could be 60 saves, because they've got like reroll ones to hit, and but my point really is, it's less about the high rend, high mortal wounds, because most armies don't do lots and lots, but it's the high volume of attacks that will get you through attrition.
Yep. And with a lot of this edition pushing people towards monsters and and smaller units just in general, just because of the points changes, you don't run into as many massed infantry or anything. So
no. Give me curse at a greater length, or give me an ability to use like a Umbral Spell Portal to extend the range from 9 to 12. Give me a Bellwind Vortex, and I will be murder stripping everybody with a lot of witch elves. But
I think everyone will do that.
Right now, I just don't have the range. But James, this has been awesome. We could keep talking. There's so much cool stuff in Nurgle. I think you've proven that it's not a trash army. It's a lot of great stuff in here. And this is just one of many examples of the way you can build and do well. I think you're well placed in the competitive landscape right now. Do you want to give a shout out to any of your crew, like the Houston Grand Alliance crew?
Yeah. So, hey to everyone who's watching, anyone who's ever wanted to come down and throw down in Texas, we have 4 grand tournaments a year, at least in each of our major cities, for our Texas Masters scene. So we'd love to see people come on by. We have multiple tournaments a month here in Houston as well. So we do, we have a Discord for that, where people from all over just chat and talk. We have both our Grand Alliance Houston here and Harambe's Heroes, which are basically the same group. But, shout out, of course, to the Austin Weird Knobs, the Dallas Defenders, and the Sons of Slambo. So it's, fantastic group we have here in Texas. We'd love to see people come on by, and we're trying to get out to more of these events. And it's great for you having me on.
I may or may not be looking at a sneaky Warhammer Open Austin trip. So I'm waiting to see.
I don't think they're going to have it in Austin again, but it's probably going to be somewhere in Texas again.
That's what I was going to say. Like, I'm waiting to see what the next series of Warhammer Open looks like. That to me, because one of the reasons I want to come over is because I can get a direct flight from where I live in Sydney direct to Dallas. So I can go to Dallas or I can go to LAX nonstop. So they're my 2 options. So if there is a Austin, Dallas, Houston, something, and the timing's right, we may see each other this year. If not, LVO next year. It's in the diary. I'm coming.
All right.
COVID variant million hopefully doesn't stop me.
We'll see what happens. So, all right. Well, cool.
All right, wrap up, James. Thank you so much for your insights. It's been awesome. Yes, I do need to come to Texas. Yes, I do need to. I've already been once, but I need more Texas barbecue.
Yes.
All right, I'm going to drop off. Everyone's showing me a lot of love. Thanks, James. Love your work, and thank you for all the insights.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for sticking around until the end. I hope you found that video interesting and you walked away with a few new ideas. If you did, I would appreciate it if you hit like on the video, as well as left me a comment. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section below. The conversation will continue over on Discord, so links down below in the episode description if you want to join the Discord and continue the Age of Sigmar conversation. I want to give a massive shout out as well to these absolute bloody legends, these champions who have continued to support me through Patreon or YouTube members. That is going directly into supporting the maintenance and the growth of this channel. So thank you very much, guys. Much appreciated. And until next time, roll more 6s.